On the evening of December 8, 1980, the world would forever be haunted by the words, "I'm shot, I'm shot," spoken by John Lennon as he collapsed on the lobby floor of the Dakota. Lennon wasn't just a Beatle. He was a cultural revolution in human form. But that night, as he lay dying, the world was left not only in grief, but with questions that lingered for decades. Rumors of conspiracies, hidden motives, and unanswered details swirled around his death. And now, one of those long-standing mysteries has finally been uncovered, and the truth is darker than anyone could have imagined. The real question is this: what has just come to light about John Lennon's final hours? And why does it change everything we thought we knew? Stick around, because this revelation is more shocking than you ever expected. A tragic childhood. John Lennon wasn't just a Beatle. He wasn't just a musician. He was a force of nature, a spark that would ignite the world's imagination. But before the fame, before the music that would change everything, he was just a little boy with a dream, born into a life full of chaos and heartbreak. John Winston Lennon came into the world on the 9th of October 1940 at Liverpool Maternity Hospital, the only child of Alfred and Julia Lennon. His father, a merchant seaman of Irish descent, was away at the time, sending paychecks that would eventually stop when he disappeared without a trace. Even as a baby, John's life was a tug-of-war. His mother, Julia, was pregnant by another man, and after her sister Mimi involved Liverpool Social Services, John ended up in the care of his aunt. But fate wasn't done testing him. In 1946, his father took him on a secret trip to Blackpool, intending to emigrate to New Zealand. Julia chased them down, and the 5-year-old was forced to choose between parents. In one account, John picked his father twice, but as Julia walked away, he ran after her, tears streaming down his face. The result? A fractured bond with his father that wouldn't be mended for nearly 20 years. John grew up at Mendips, 251 Menlove Avenue, under the watch of Mimi and her husband, George Toogood Smith, a couple with no children of their own. It was a household of contrasts. Mimi offered stability, while his uncle George pushed him to think, to play, and to solve puzzles. Julia visited regularly, teaching him banjo, showing him records by Elvis and Fats Domino, and planting the first seeds of the rebel musician he would become. Even as a boy, Lennon's personality was electric and dangerous. He described himself later as a loud-mouthed lunatic poet/musician who couldn't hide his true self. Teachers called him a troublemaker. Parents warned their children to stay away, yet he drew them in, bending their minds, challenging authority, and quietly learning lessons about independence and feminism from the 5 women who shaped him, especially his mother. Holidays were a chaotic mix of family visits and adventures with cousins, trips to cinemas, Blackpool Tower Circus, and performances that would mesmerize a young Lennon. Yet life always reminded him of its fragility. His uncle George died suddenly in 1955, and in 1958, tragedy struck harder. His mother, Julia, was killed by a car, leaving John a teenager consumed by grief, blind rage, and rebellion. This trauma would fuel his art, later inspiring hauntingly personal songs like the Beatles' Julia. School offered little refuge. Quarry Bank High School called him energetic but misdirected, talented but unwilling to conform. He bullied, he fought, he disrupted, and all the while, he was quietly building the mindset of a revolutionary artist. Julia's final gift, an inexpensive guitar, became his first weapon in a lifelong battle against the ordinary. Mimi doubted him, scoffing that he'd never make a living from music, but John's ambitions were never ordinary. Even in college, the trouble followed. At Liverpool College of Art, he pushed boundaries, flaunted teddy boy style, and flirted with expulsion. Fellow students, like Cynthia Powell, who would become his wife, watched him flirt with chaos. And yet, there was something magnetic about the way he lived and created. This was the boy who would change the world. The chaos, The heartbreak, the rebellion, they weren't just growing pains. They were the blueprint for a mind that would one day question everything, challenge everything, and redefine music forever, making it big and leaving the Beatles. At just 15, John Lennon was already on a path that would rewrite music history. In September 1956, he formed a skiffle group, the Quarrymen, named after his school, Quarry Bank High. It was a modest start, but even then, John's magnetic, rebellious personality shone through. By summer 1957, the Quarrymen were performing sets that blended skiffle with rock and roll, a glimpse of the genre-bending genius brewing in Liverpool. It was at their second performance, on the 6th of July 1957, at a garden fete at St. Peter's Church in Woolton, that Lennon first met Paul McCartney. Lennon immediately asked Paul to join the band, setting in motion a partnership that would change the world. Not everyone approved. Paul's Aunt Mimi and father worried about Lennon's lower-class friends influencing Paul, but they allowed rehearsals in their home at 20 Forthlin Road. During this period, Lennon wrote his first song, Hello, Little Girl, later a UK top 10 hit for the Foremost. Paul suggested George Harrison for lead guitar. Though only 14, Harrison impressed Lennon after a bus stop audition. Stuart Sutcliffe, Lennon's art school friend, joined as bassist. By 1960, the lineup of Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and Sutcliffe became the Beatles we know. In August 1960, the band embarked on a 48-night Hamburg residency. They recruited drummer Pete Best, and though Aunt Mimi pleaded with Lennon to focus on art instead, the experience was transformative. Exhausting overnight performances introduced them to Preludin, a stimulant to power through marathon shows. These nights forged their legendary endurance and stage presence. By 1962, Brian Epstein had become the band's manager, remolding their image, stage presence, and wardrobe. Lennon, initially resistant, eventually complied, joking he'd wear a bloody balloon if it meant getting paid. Sutcliffe stayed in Hamburg, McCartney moved to bass, and Ringo Starr replaced Best, cementing the classic four-piece. Their first single, Love Me Do, hit number 17 in the UK, a modest success hinting at the storm to come. Recording Please Please Me on the 11th of February 1963, the band completed the session in under 10 hours. Lennon, sick with a cold, delivered a legendary performance on Twist and Shout, his strained voice raw with emotion. The Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership dominated the album, though at this stage, Lennon's love of wordplay was just emerging. McCartney later said Lennon was like our own little Elvis, the quickest wit, smartest, and natural leader of the group. By 1963, Beatlemania had swept the UK. Lennon's first son, Julian, was born in April, even as he toured relentlessly. Their Royal Variety Show performance showcased his irreverence. He asked the cheaper seats to clap, and the wealthy audience to rattle their jewelry, a subtle mockery of the elite that foreshadowed his lifelong challenge to authority. February 1964 marked their historic U.S. debut on The Ed Sullivan Show, launching them worldwide. The following 2 years were relentless: touring, filming, and songwriting. Lennon explored literature with In His Own Right and A Spaniard in the Works, playful, experimental reflections of his wit. In 1965, the Beatles became members of the Order of the British Empire, a symbol of mainstream approval, yet Lennon remained unconstrained by convention. Fame came with strain. Screaming fans often drowned out music, threatening their musicianship. Hits like Help were more than catchy tunes. They expressed Lennon's personal cries for relief. His appearance shifted during the so-called Fat Elvis period, while press criticism fueled cycles of weight loss and self-reinvention. Lennon's curiosity extended to psychedelics, with a shocking introduction to LSD at a dentist's dinner party, an experience that left him and his bandmates both panicked and exhilarated. In March 1966, Lennon's remark to the Evening Standard that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus now ignited international outrage. U.S. record burnings, threats from the Ku Klux Klan, and a halted tour forced the band off the road. Lennon turned toward studio experimentation, layering complex sound and meaning into their music. After their final 1966 concert, Lennon briefly acted in How I Won the War, but returned to music with increased LSD use. 1967 brought Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Strawberry Fields Forever, showcasing his lyrical depth and conceptual daring. The same year, All You Need Is Love reached an estimated 400 million viewers via the Our World broadcast, cementing Lennon as a voice of the summer of love. A trip to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram in India marked the Beatles' creative and spiritual divergence. Lennon's business acumen grew with Harrison as they founded Apple Corps, a multimedia company fostering artistic freedom. Amid 1968 political unrest, Lennon released Revolution, urging thought over violence and facing criticism from radicals. Yoko Ono's presence in the studio, a break from Beatles policy, heightened tensions, foreshadowing the band's eventual breakup. That year also saw Lennon join the supergroup Dirty Mac for the Rolling Stones' Rock and Roll Circus, highlighting his boundary-pushing collaborations. March 1969 was pivotal. Lennon married Yoko Ono, producing provocative lithographs and launching the Plastic Ono Band. Singles like Give Peace a Chance, Cold Turkey, and Instant Karma showcased his activism and willingness to shock and inspire. He returned his MBE in protest of Britain's involvement in international conflicts and quietly left the Beatles in September, frustrated with McCartney's public announcement and perceived power dynamics. But while the world watched Lennon transform music and challenge politics, his personal life was just as turbulent. The passion and intensity that drove his songs and activism also shaped his relationships, making them messy, consuming, and impossible to ignore. A complicated love life. John Lennon's love life was as intense, complicated, and headline-grabbing as his music. Before the world knew him as a Beatle, before the fame, the songs, and the legend, there was Cynthia. John and Cynthia met at art school, and from the very beginning their relationship was a storm. Cynthia later revealed that John could be physically violent early on, and his words often cut deep, leaving marks that weren't visible but lingered. Their love was passionate, messy, and utterly human. They married in 1962, just as Cynthia was pregnant with their son Julian. But even this milestone came with strings attached. The pregnancy and the marriage had to remain secret. John's image as the charming, unattached Beatle was carefully cultivated, and management feared any hint of domesticity might damage the group's appeal. Cynthia recounted how she had to walk around pretending to be somebody else, repeatedly denying she was John's wife whenever asked. For months, she carried both the baby and the burden of secrecy, a ghost in plain sight. Their marriage was doomed to tension and heartbreak. Mutual accusations of infidelity and the pressures of fame created a chasm too wide to bridge. One day, Cynthia came home to find John and Yoko Ono together. She recalled that she had stayed over the night before, only to return and witness the scene that would shatter their marriage. There was nothing she could do to stop John, whether it was his love for Yoko or his drug use at the time. Their divorce in 1968 was bitter, messy, and unavoidable. John met Yoko at an art gallery, and the connection was immediate. Both driven by creativity and curiosity, they bonded over music, art, and a shared desire to push boundaries. Lennon later told Rolling Stone that he had called Yoko over one night while Cynthia was away. Unsure what to do, he took her to his studio, played his far-out tapes, electronic experiments, comedy sketches, all the works, and was struck by her reaction. Inspired, they created two virgins together, working through the night and making love at dawn. It was intense, raw, and emblematic of a love that would consume them both. John and Yoko married in 1969 and had their son Sean in 1975. Despite constant scrutiny and accusations that Yoko had broken up the Beatles, John defended her fiercely, insisting the band's drift was inevitable. They remained partners until John's tragic death in 1980. Decades later, Yoko reflected, "We were partners, and I feel that we are still partners. We're together, still." The third woman in John Lennon's life. John Lennon and Yoko Ono's love story was the headline, the controversy, and the heartbreak all rolled into one. They married in 1969, welcomed their son Sean in 1975, and despite constant scrutiny and the relentless accusations that Yoko had broken up the Beatles, John defended her fiercely. He insisted that the Beatles' dissolution was inevitable, a drift beyond the influence of any one woman. The pair remained partners until John's tragic death in 1980. Decades later, Yoko reflected, "We were partners, and I feel that we are still partners. We're together, still." Yet between those high-profile chapters, there was a lesser-known, intensely human story, John Lennon's Lost Weekend with May Pang. Pang was his partner for 18 months, during a period when he was estranged from Yoko, a time often dismissed or misunderstood in Beatles lore, but which reveals a man both chaotic and deeply in need of grounding. The unraveling began after John's first divorce from Cynthia Powell. Cynthia had returned from a trip to Greece to find John having breakfast with Yoko, both in pajamas, casually ignoring her presence. This domestic scene, seemingly mundane, marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a very strange, very public one. After John temporarily split from Yoko, he began seeing other women in the same apartment, sometimes in full view of Yoko herself, who reportedly didn't flinch at the scene. This was the start of the Lost Weekend, the 1973 to 1975 stretch, where John left the Dakota in New York and moved to Los Angeles with May Pang, his personal and production assistant. What made this arrangement extraordinary was that it was orchestrated by Yoko. She instructed Pang to accompany John and act as his partner for all intents and purposes, believing that John could not handle life on his own. On their first day together, John wasted no time. He kissed Pang before leaving New York, setting the tone for a relationship that would be as unconventional as it was intimate. Official accounts portray this time as a descent into chaos. Drug and alcohol binges, destroyed hotel rooms, and public incidents of arrogance. John's behavior was so wild that he was kicked out of the Troubadour nightclub. But Pang's version, as recounted in the 2022 documentary The Lost Weekend, A Love Story, paints a fuller, more nuanced picture. She emphasizes that amidst the chaos, there was genuine love, stability, and moments of brilliance. Pang, a 22-year-old from Spanish Harlem with a Chinese family background, had initially worked on experimental films with John and Yoko. She became John's assistant, and when the separation came, she stepped into a role she hadn't fully anticipated but embraced with a surprising maturity. By spring 1974, she had managed to calm some of John's turbulence. They returned to New York, not to the Dakota, but to a private apartment of their own. With Pang's support, John reconnected with his estranged son Julian, whom he had ignored for 3 years. He even reunited musically with Paul McCartney in a jam session featuring Stevie Wonder, Harry Nilsson, and others, resulting in the infamous bootleg A Toot and a Snore in '74. Lennon's solo career flourished in this period as well. He collaborated with Elton John, producing his only #1 hit outside the Beatles, Whatever Gets You Through the Night. Albums like Walls and Bridges and the cover project Rock and Roll, overseen by Phil Spector, showed a creative high point during a time most assume was merely a debauch. Yet Yoko's presence loomed large. She maintained daily contact with Pang, dictating how John's time should be spent, even instructing Pang to oversee interactions between John and his son. When Pang briefly left during a minor spat, Yoko called her back, insisting John couldn't be left alone for a reunion with Julian and Cynthia. Pang obeyed. In doing so, she not only ensured John's stability, but also forged a lasting friendship with Cynthia, bridging gaps Lennon himself had ignored. By February 1975, the lost weekend had come to an end. John learnt Yoko was allowing him to return home, and Pang realized her chapter was closing. He went back to the Dakota, resumed life as a husband and father, and devoted himself to Sean. Music took a back seat until 1980, when Double Fantasy was released, just 3 weeks before Lennon was assassinated. Till today, Pang maintains that she and John continued their discreet intimacy until his death, a bond that endured beyond the headlines. Yet, even as Lennon seemed to have settled into this new chapter of family and quiet, the shadows of obsession were closing in. One of his own fans, consumed by envy and a warped sense of justice, had been waiting, watching, and planning high W to end Lennon's life. When a fan's obsession turns deadly. On the evening of December 8, 1980, the world lost one of its most iconic voices. John Lennon, former Beatle, cultural revolutionary, and advocate for peace, was shot and fatally wounded in the archway of the Dakota, his New York City home. But that night, what seemed like a random act of violence was anything but. It was the result of careful, cold-blooded planning by someone consumed with obsession. Mark David Chapman, a 25-year-old former security guard from Honolulu, Hawaii, had long fixated on Lennon. Meeting him was never enough. Chapman wanted to punish him. The trigger for his obsession was complex, rooted partly in Lennon's infamous 1966 remark that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, and partly in the perceived hypocrisy of songs like God and Imagine, which preached anti-materialism and spiritual ideals while Lennon lived in comfort. To Chapman, Lennon was a phony, a figure whose kindness and artistry masked a life of privilege. Chapman even idolized Holden Caulfield from J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye, seeing in the fictional hero's disdain for phonies a moral mandate to target Lennon. Months before that December evening, Chapman meticulously prepared. He purchased a 5-shot .38 special revolver from Charter Arms in Honolulu and carefully planned his journey to New York City, even consulting the Federal Aviation Administration on how to transport the firearm safely without damaging the bullets. Arriving in early December, Chapman checked into the YMCA on the Upper West Side before later moving to a Sheraton in Midtown Manhattan. He blended in, observed, and waited. Always patient, always calculating. On the morning of December 8th, Chapman positioned himself outside the Dakota. He moved among fans, chatting casually with the doorman, and even meeting Lennon's family nanny, Helen Seaman, returning from a walk with 5-year-old Sean. Chapman complimented the boy, calling him a beautiful boy, and quoting Lennon's own song, "Beautiful Boy, Darling Boy," a moment of chilling irony, given what would follow. Inside the Dakota, Lennon and Yoko Ono prepared for a Rolling Stone magazine photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz. Lennon insisted that both he and Yoko appear naked together for the cover, a decision reflecting his desire to share life and art without barriers. Shots of John alone were taken, but he wanted Yoko included. The session wrapped around 3:30 p.m., and shortly after, Lennon gave what would become his last interview to San Francisco DJ Dave Sholin, writer Laurie Kay, and producer Ron Hummel for the RKO radio network. By approximately 5 p.m., Lennon and Ono left the Dakota in a limousine, delayed by the RKO crew, heading to the record plant to mix Yoko's track Walking on Thin Ice with Lennon on lead guitar. It was in that moment of ordinary life, leaving the building, preparing to work, a husband and father moving through his routine, that Chapman made his move. Approaching Lennon, he asked for an autograph on a copy of Double Fantasy, Lennon's just-released album. True to form, Lennon signed patiently, asking if Chapman needed anything else. Chapman later recalled the irony of Lennon's calm, courteous behavior, describing him as very kind, very patient, very cordial. Paul Goresh, an amateur photographer and fan, captured the scene. Lennon, calm and approachable, signing the autograph for the man who would soon end his life. Evening fell, and the tension in the air went unnoticed by those around them. At approximately 10:50 p.m., the Lennons returned to the Dakota. Lennon insisted on saying goodnight to Sean before a planned dinner with Ono at the Stage Deli. They exited the limousine on 72nd Street, choosing the public route rather than the more secure courtyard. Chapman, waiting silently, nodded at Ono as she passed, a casual gesture that belied the horror to come. Lennon glanced at Chapman briefly, perhaps recognizing him from earlier, before continuing toward the building. Seconds later, Chapman drew his revolver from beneath his coat. From a distance of 9 to 10 feet, he fired 5 hollow-point bullets at Lennon's back. One missed entirely, striking a window of the Dakota. The remaining 4 tore through Lennon, 2 into his left side, one exiting through his chest and lung, the other lodging in his neck. A third struck his left shoulder. The fourth embedded perilously near his aorta beside his heart. Each bullet was potentially fatal. Combined, they inflicted catastrophic trauma. Staggering up 5 steps into the lobby, Lennon cried, "I'm shot! I'm shot!" before collapsing, scattering the cassettes he had been carrying. Jose Sangenis Perdomo, the doorman, wrested the gun from Chapman and kicked it across the pavement. Concierge Jay Hastings attempted a tourniquet, but quickly realized the wound's severity. He covered Lennon's chest with his uniform jacket and removed his blood-stained glasses while calling for emergency assistance. Chapman remained calm, standing on 72nd Street, and when asked by Perdomo if he understood what he had done, he simply replied, "I just shot John Lennon." Officers Stephen Spiro and Peter Cullen arrived within minutes. They found Chapman reading The Catcher in the Rye, handcuffed him immediately, and noted his eerie composure. Chapman apologized coldly for ruining their night, oblivious to the magnitude of his crime. Meanwhile, officers Herb Frauenberger and Tony Palma attended to Lennon, lying face down, blood pouring from his mouth, with Hastings desperately assisting. Officers James Moran and Bill Gamble soon arrived, recognizing the urgency, and loaded Lennon into Moran and Gamble's patrol car, speeding toward Roosevelt Hospital on West 59th Street, with Ono following in another vehicle. In the car, Lennon responded to the simple question, "Are you John Lennon?" with a nod, though his attempts at speech were reduced to gurgles. Minutes later, he arrived at Roosevelt Hospital. Medical staff sprang into action, performing resuscitative measures, including chest opening and heart massage. But the damage was extensive. 3 bullets had passed completely through his body. The 4th lodged near his heart. Vital arteries were destroyed, and major blood vessels irreparably damaged. Accounts vary on who exactly performed the surgery. Stephen Lynn, head of the emergency department, claimed to massage Lennon's heart and attempt resuscitation for 20 minutes, assisted by 2 other doctors. Dr. Richard Marks described performing a massive blood transfusion and heart massage before recognizing the futility. Third-year resident David Halloran stated he initially did not know the patient was Lennon, and only assisted once the identity became clear. John Lennon was pronounced dead at 11:15 p.m., though some reports note 11:07 p.m. The hospital's sound system played All My Loving by the Beatles as he was declared dead, a tragic echo of the life he had left behind. His body was transported to the city mortuary at 520 First Avenue for autopsy. The official cause of death: hypovolemic shock from loss of over 80% of blood volume due to multiple through-and-through gunshot wounds to the left shoulder and chest. The bullets destroyed his left lung, subclavian artery, and aorta. Even with immediate medical intervention, survival was impossible. The wounds were precise, lethal, and catastrophic. The world awoke the next day in disbelief. A man whose life had provided the soundtrack to generations was gone, felled not by accident, illness, or misfortune, but by an obsessive fan who sought to punish him for his success, ideals, and authenticity. Everything Chapman could not become. Lennon's final hours, the interviews, photo shoots, playful moments with his family were overshadowed by the horror of his murder. Mark David Chapman remained calm as officers led him away, a figure frozen in his own darkness. The Dakota, a building that had witnessed countless chapters of music history, now bore silent witness to its most tragic. December 8, 1980, was etched into history as the day the world lost not just a Beatle, but a visionary, a husband, a father, and an unrepeatable spirit. Every interaction, every moment, every detail of that night now carried the weight of loss, remembrance, and the enduring legacy of John Lennon. The John Lennon mystery finally solved, and it's bad. For years, people have asked why Mark David Chapman, a devoted Beatles fan, ended John Lennon's life. The answer lies in a mix of obsession, ideology, and anger. Chapman was deeply unsettled by Lennon's famous remark in 1966 that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, and by later songs like Imagine and God, where Lennon questioned religion and preached a world without possessions. To Chapman, who had recently undergone a religious conversion, this was more than provocative. It was blasphemous. Chapman's anger wasn't random. He immersed himself in Lennon's world through Anthony Fawcett's biography, John Lennon, One Day at a Time, which detailed Lennon's lavish life in New York City. Lennon spoke of love, peace, and equality, yet lived surrounded by yachts, estates, and millions of dollars. Chapman fixated on the contradiction. As his wife Gloria later said, he was furious that Lennon preached ideals of simplicity while living in opulence. Chapman himself explained that Lennon's music and wealth made him feel betrayed, like he had been laughing at fans who built parts of their lives around his songs. Adding fuel to the fire was Chapman's obsession with the fictional Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye. Caulfield raged against phonies, and Chapman saw Lennon as the ultimate fraud, a man preaching anti-materialism while reveling in excess. He later described his mindset as total blackness, a swirl of rage and moral judgment, merging Caulfield's world with Lennon's life, a dangerous justification in his mind. But for some, Chapman's motives alone don't tell the whole story. Conspiracy theories have persisted for decades, fueled by Lennon's political activism and the strange circumstances surrounding his death. Both the CIA and FBI had reportedly spied on Lennon because of his left-wing views. Some theorists, like barrister and journalist Fenton Bresler, in his 1990 book Who Killed John Lennon, suggested that Chapman may have been brainwashed, much like a character from The Manchurian Candidate, to act as an assassin. Liverpool playwright Ian Carroll dramatized a similar idea in One Bad Thing, portraying Chapman as manipulated by a rogue wing of the CIA who wanted Lennon off the scene. Salvador Astrucia, in his 2004 book Rethinking John Lennon's Assassination, The FBI's War on Rock Stars, even argued that forensic evidence casts doubt on Chapman's sole culpability. A 2010 documentary, The Day John Lennon Died, further suggested that Jose Perdomo, the Dakota doorman, had connections to the CIA through his past as a Cuban exile involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion. On December 8, 1980, Chapman acted on his obsession. Outside the Dakota, Lennon signed an autograph for him moments before Chapman fired 5 shots, 4 striking Lennon, ending the life of a global icon. Chapman pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years to life. Chapman has been eligible for parole since 2000, but every attempt has been denied. The board has cited his desire for notoriety, his risk to public safety, and the danger that he could re-offend. Today, Chapman remains behind bars at Greenhaven Correctional Facility. a man whose obsession and ideology destroyed a life and left the world asking the same question. Why? Do you think Chapman's reason for cutting John Lennon's life short makes any sense? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.